He pointed at me and said I stole from our father. The room froze and my name broke like cheap glass. Neighbors stared, and my mother looked away without blinking twice. Dylan smiled small, pretending shock, hiding satisfaction behind careful concern. I swallowed everything and decided silence would be my shield. It happened at my parents' anniversary party at the VFW. Streamers hung low, and brisket smoked behind the rented bar. Dad's construction crew clapped before the cake, then everything collapsed sharply. Cash from the company safe appeared inside my backpack, zipped tight. My chest burned, but I kept breathing slow, counting each second. My name is Aaron Whitfield, oldest son of Mark Whitfield. Dylan is younger, charming, and always measuring rooms for advantage. We grew up in Dayton, Ohio, near a cracked baseball diamond. Dad runs a small crew building porches and roofing storm damage. Mom keeps the books and brings soup to anyone who hurts. People trusted us because Dad fixed their homes after disasters. That trust died fast as gossip cut through the hall light. Someone whispered police, and I pictured cuffs and county concrete. I saw Dylan watching me, weighing whether I'd explode loud. I chose silence because rage would make me exactly guilty. I wish it weren't you, Aaron, but proof is here, Dylan said. He lifted my backpack like a trophy and shook it once. Dad's face looked older, like paint peeling from winter boards. Say something, son, Mark whispered, his voice thinner than fishing line. My mouth opened, but the right words were missing completely. I remembered Dad teaching measurements, and I measured this moment carefully. Every word would sound defensive, and defensive always sounds guilty fast. I lowered my eyes and stared at my work-roughened hands. Silence gathered around me like snow, cold, limiting, still forgiving. A neighbor took photos, and shame spread faster than spilled beer. Mom, Diane, kept folding napkins, pretending order could return again. Her hands shook like power lines in winter, rattling the table. Let him go home, she said, eyes refusing to meet mine. Dad nodded once, then turned away to slice the cake. The room resumed its hum, but curiosity gnawed like rats. I walked out carrying air, lighter than guilt, and heavier too. Outside, February wind cut across the parking lot like razors. I stood under the flagpole and stared at the dark sky. Silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was a blade I carried. I promised myself to live well until truth walked out. My apartment off Linden Avenue smelled like coffee and machine oil. Tools hung over the sink because space was never truly enough. I set the backpack down and stared at the zipper. The stack of cash still rested there, crisp, green, and damning. It wasn't for me, but proving that felt impossible tonight. Dylan had borrowed my truck yesterday, claiming he needed moving help. He had keys, and he knew my habits like gospel. We were brothers raised, close, which means easy access and shortcuts. I bagged the cash in freezer bags and taped labels. Silence needed structure, evidence guarded by patience and quiet work. By morning, 3 clients texted cancellations suddenly without offering explanations. A 4th called and exhaled before speaking like a leaky tire. Aaron, let's reschedule indefinitely. Things look messy right now, she said. I understand, I answered, and my voice surprised me with calm. Online posts bloomed like weeds, photos captioned with hungry certainty. Dayton is small enough that rumors really wear name tags. I watched my calendar empty like a stadium after bad weather. Each silence from friends felt heavy, but I welcomed the quiet. Words weaponize fast, but quiet forces people to face themselves. I brewed coffee slowly and wrote down everything I remembered. I drove to the river and parked near the old bridge. Ice flows tapped the pilings softly, like a metronome keeping time. I said nothing, not to God, not to the wind. My breath came steady, and the anger ebbed without vanishing. Silence asked me for discipline, and I agreed without swagger. No speeches, no scenes, just work and patience and clean records. I would rebuild trust with service, then let truth reveal itself. Dylan's victory depended on noise, and I refused his arena. I started the engine and chose to live like proof. That night, my revenge became dignity, and dignity became home. I lost my job 2 days after the party, just like that. The owner of the hardware store called me in with tight lips. He said customers were talking, that the store's image mattered more. I nodded, thanked him for the work, and left quietly again. My savings barely covered rent, and the landlord didn't believe me. People talk, Aaron. I can't risk the building's peace, he said. I packed my duffel, my tools, and the last of my pride. The cold that week felt personal, like punishment carved into air. I slept in my truck near the old scrapyard for warmth. Silence doesn't echo when no one remembers your name anymore. The first few nights were spent counting breaths under torn blankets. My breath fogged the windshield, framing my face like confession glass. I watched other men pass, shoulders hunched, forgotten in their own storms. I wasn't different, just quieter and less visible than the rest. Hunger didn't arrive with drama. It just settled slow and stayed. I sold my wrench set first, then the circular saw I loved. I told myself they were only things, not pieces of who I was. Still, each sale scraped something soft from my chest. I walked to the river again, feeding ducks crumbs of stale bread. I realized I was the bread, dry, broken, still somehow useful. Dylan didn't reach out once, not a text or a word. He knew I wouldn't fight back. Silence made me predictable. I imagined him bragging about his new contract, clean and smiling. The thought twisted inside me, sharp, but not enough to shout. I'd chosen quiet, but quiet didn't mean numb. Not forever. Nights were worst when wind slipped through cracked windows. I used to dream of hammer sounds. Now I dreamed of empty rooms. Sometimes I muttered my defense to nobody, then stopped myself again. The silence became a habit, and habits become armor in time. I started believing maybe God liked me better invisible for now. One afternoon, I walked downtown, following warmth instead of purpose. A diner's window glowed orange with coffee steam and laughter. I pressed my hands to the glass, just watching a family eat. The father's hands reminded me of Dad's. Broad, sure, weathered. The waitress caught my stare but didn't turn me away. She opened the door and said, "You need warmth more than pride." Her name was Lacey, middle-aged, soft-voiced, and kind without questions. She handed me soup, said it was a mistake order nobody wanted. I sat by the heater, sipping slowly, letting heat thaw my chest. That small kindness did what no apology ever could that month. I returned the next morning, offered to wash dishes for a meal. She smiled, nodded, and pointed toward the sink like it was destiny. The water was warm, the soap rough, and the rhythm honest. For the first time since Dylan's lie, my hands felt useful again. I didn't speak much. I just scrubbed and watched plates sparkle. Lacey said nothing either, maybe knowing silence had its own weight. After closing, she handed me leftovers and $20 quietly. "You work like someone who lost something he cared about," she said. I smiled small, because truth didn't need translation tonight. For the first time, I didn't dream of revenge, just tomorrow's shift. Winter turned to March, and snow became rain that wouldn't quit. My truck broke down, but the diner let me sleep in the back. Lacey trusted me with keys, which felt heavier than any apology. She said her son left for the Marines, and quiet helped her heal. We shared silence like prayer, both understanding without needing stories. I saved each dollar until I could buy used tools again. The first hammer I held made my palms ache in memory. "You've got builder hands," she said, nodding with quiet pride. I laughed for the first time in months. The sound strange, real. That night, I promised myself I'd build again, even from ashes. The news about Dad's company came through a coworker at lunch. Whitfield Roofing lost their biggest contract. Something about poor management, he said. My stomach twisted, but I stayed still, eyes on my soup bowl. Dylan had inherited control after framing me, and now karma worked late. I didn't celebrate. I just felt the strange ache of balance. Life doesn't always scream justice. It whispers it when you listen close. I washed my hands slower that night, letting the water rinse regret. Part of me wanted to call Dad, but I had no right yet. Silence had carried me this far. Breaking it felt premature. I slept beneath the humming neon sign, dreaming of forgiveness I hadn't earned. Days turned into steady work, and rain turned the earth forgiving. I helped fix the diner's leaky roof one afternoon without charge. The smell of wet tar and coffee mixed like new beginnings. Lacey watched from the window, her smile soft as sunlight. "You fix things even when you're broken," she said quietly. That line stayed with me longer than hunger ever had. Maybe I wasn't ruined. Maybe I was just being remade slower. Each nail I drove into those boards sounded like a heartbeat returning. I didn't know where I was heading, but I was finally moving. Silence had changed shape. It was no longer my cage. It was my compass. The world didn't hand me miracles, but it stopped kicking as hard. A local mechanic noticed my work fixing the diner's old generator. He asked if I knew carpentry and offered me a small side job. I took it, grateful, careful, and ready to start over clean. I walked to the river again that night, no longer broken. The water moved faster now, strong, unbothered, like it remembered nothing. I whispered to it, "I'll earn my peace the slow way." Maybe God heard it, or maybe it was only my echo. Either way, the next chapter of my life waited with open doors. The silence that once destroyed me had started teaching me how to build again. The first real job came on a Monday morning, cold and gray. I'd been helping at the diner for months when the mechanic called. His name was Frank Brewer, short, wide-shouldered, always chewing toothpicks. "You good with wood, kid?" he asked, though I was 32. "Depends who's asking," I said, smiling for the first time easily. He laughed, said he needed shelves built in his small garage. The pay was nothing fancy, but it sounded like purpose again. I borrowed a saw, used scrap planks, and worked till my back screamed. The smell of pine dust and oil felt like forgiveness mixed with sweat. When I finished, Frank looked at me like he saw something useful again. He paid cash, no questions, and told his buddies at the bar. Word spread quiet but steady, the kind of talk that travels right. 2 weeks later, a farmer named Ed called needing a chicken coop. I said yes, even though I didn't own half the tools I needed. I borrowed, improvised, measured twice, and prayed the boards would fit. When I delivered, Ed said, "That's better than what I asked for." I drove back grinning, the steering wheel warm under my tired hands. No paycheck had ever felt this honest before in my life. I wasn't rich, but I was something better, needed again. Silence had finally built me a place in the noise. Lacey smiled when I told her about it, handing me apple pie. "Told you broken men make the best builders," she said softly. I ate slow, thinking about the months I'd spent being invisible. Every word she spoke felt like a nail holding my world together. I rented a small storage unit and stacked my tools inside, proudly. It wasn't much, but it was mine, free from judgment or pity. I painted the name Whitfield Repairs on a scrapboard, shaky but hopeful. Seeing my name again, even handwritten, made my throat tighten painfully. One step at a time, I whispered to no one but God. The world hadn't forgiven me yet, but it had stopped laughing as loud. I built birdhouses at night, sold them at the farmers' market weekends. Kids liked painting them, and parents liked my prices and my smile. It wasn't fame or wealth, but it was laughter, human and near. I learned to talk again, slowly, cautiously, like testing an old wound. When people asked about my past, I said only, "Life humbled me." That line shut down gossip better than any defense could. Frank started sending more work my way. Small repairs and porch steps, each nail driven, each screw tightened, felt like reclaiming my own name. I was no longer the man framed for theft. I was the man who built again. Silence had rewritten me brick by brick. One afternoon I ran into my old friend Tyler at the supply store. His face showed confusion first, then pity, then quiet admiration. "Man, I heard things," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "You don't owe me any version of the truth," I said kindly. He nodded, then said, "Well, if you're working again, I might have jobs." Tyler owned a property management company, small but steady in Dayton. He gave me a chance to bid on maintenance contracts the next week. I didn't know business talk, but I knew sweat and honesty well. I shook his hand, promised fair prices, and walked out trembling inside. That night I cried quietly in my truck, not from pain, but from hope. The first few jobs through Tyler's company were rough but fair. I fixed railings, patched drywall, even painted old apartments alone. Tenants thanked me, some offered coffee, some just nodded with respect. Nobody asked about Dylan, and I learned not to bring him up. I'd traded bitterness for work, and work paid in dignity and peace. Still, late at night, I'd lie awake hearing his voice in memory. The way he'd said, "Proof is here," echoed like an old wound. But now, when I heard it, I also heard my own silence. It wasn't weakness anymore. It was proof that truth survives without shouting. Every board I repaired was another word in my slow living statement. Months turned into steady contracts, and my name began traveling kindly again. Lacey teased me, saying I was becoming the quiet legend of Dayton. I smiled, though I didn't believe legends belonged to men like me. I just worked, slept, prayed, and thanked her for hot coffee. One evening, she handed me a business card someone left at the diner. It was from a local community center. They needed a hall renovation. My heart pounded. That was a real project, not scraps or side work. "Go for it," Lacey said, eyes shining with belief. I hesitated but nodded, whispering to myself that silence built this too. I didn't have to shout my worth. My work already spoke in wood and steel. At the community center, I met Sarah, the director, brisk and tired. She didn't care about my past, just about finishing before the grant expired. I promised her clean work, fair rates, and long hours without complaint. The job lasted 6 weeks, through rain and long Ohio nights. By the end, the place smelled like paint and new beginnings. She shook my hand in front of volunteers and said, "You saved us." That sentence echoed deeper than any apology I'd ever wanted. Word spread again, quiet, steady, mercifully clean this time. I was back in daylight, my name attached to good stories again. Dylan's ghost still whispered, but his lies no longer owned my mornings. After payday, I drove out to the hill overlooking the old VFW. The parking lot looked smaller now, and the sign had rusted corners. I parked, rolled down the window, and just sat breathing slow. This was where my name had died once, but it wasn't buried. "You were wrong, little brother," I murmured, not in anger, just truth. My revenge was breathing freely, working honestly, and standing taller. I didn't need apologies. I needed peace, and I'd built it myself. The wind carried no applause, but it carried something better, quiet understanding. I started the truck, ready for whatever new chapter the silence wanted next. I wasn't done rising yet. This was only the first step toward redemption. Growth didn't happen in a rush. It came like dawn, quiet and patient. The community center job opened doors I never even knew existed before. People started calling me the man who doesn't talk much but delivers. I liked that. It meant reputation finally replaced rumor in my town. I hired a teenager named Marcus to help, a lanky kid with drive. He reminded me of myself before everything went sideways years ago. "You don't yell much," he said one morning while sanding porch steps. "Doesn't make work faster," I replied, and he grinned at that simple truth. Together we built things that lasted longer than gossip ever could. Every nail hit clean sounded like a heartbeat returning from long silence. I saved enough to rent a workshop, a small unit off Route 48. It smelled like sawdust and motor oil, the scent of my second life. I painted Whitfield Repairs and Restorations on a metal sign above the door. Seeing my name out there again made my stomach twist with pride. Some nights I'd sit in the truck staring at it until dark fell. I still didn't have much, but I had direction and control again. Marcus brought friends from trade school to help on weekends when busy. I paid them fairly, made coffee, and played old blues on the radio. They started calling me boss, half teasing, half serious, and I didn't correct them. It felt strange, being trusted again, but I wore that trust carefully. Lacey still kept me grounded, reminding me kindness mattered. More than contracts. She'd stop by the shop with pie and news from the diner crowd. "Word is you're fixing half the county one roof at a time," she'd laugh. I'd shrug, saying work was cheaper than therapy, which made her smile. One evening, she left an envelope on my counter before walking out. Inside was a note. "Don't lose your heart chasing redemption. It's already yours." I folded it and kept it in my wallet beside my late mother's photo. Mom had passed a year earlier, and I hadn't attended the funeral. Dylan hadn't told me she was sick until it was over. That truth reopened wounds I thought silence had healed long ago. I threw myself into work harder after that, like pain could be measured. I fixed roofs through sleet, patched walls till my arms gave out nightly. People liked my reliability, called me even when jobs weren't big enough. I never turned them down. Every screw tightened was another piece of peace. Some customers talked about my brother, how his business had slowed badly. They said Whitfield Roofing was under investigation for misusing client funds. I listened quietly, nodded, and said only, "Hope they find the truth." Inside, a strange calm replaced the satisfaction I once expected to feel. Karma didn't need my help. It had its own timing and tools. I just kept working, earning back what lies once stole. By the end of that summer, I had 3 employees and real contracts. We started remodeling homes for veterans and seniors who needed affordable work. The mayor's office even recognized us for community service in the paper. Seeing my name in print under Local Builder Gives Back hit hard. I wasn't chasing headlines, but I'd spent years being one for the wrong reason. I hung the article in the shop quietly, more reminder than trophy. Marcus brought his mom by to meet me, proud as if it were his. "You changed my boy," she said, squeezing my hand warm and grateful. That night, I drove home thinking about how good men rebuild without shouting. Silence, Once my burden had turned into my loudest kind of pride. Still, some nights were heavy with memory, the kind that pressed on ribs. I'd wake up hearing Dad's voice telling me to fix my mistakes faster. He still hadn't called since that night at the VFW years ago. I didn't blame him anymore. But forgiveness isn't a switch. It's slow. I imagined him older now, tired, maybe regretting the words he didn't say. Sometimes I drafted letters I'd never send, ending them all the same. "I'm okay, Dad." Silence saved me. Then I'd burn them in the shop's old barrel behind the lot. Watching the paper curl into ash gave me a sense of control again. I was still healing, one quiet victory at a time. Business picked up enough that I finally moved into a small rented house. It had creaky floors and a porch. I rebuilt myself with quiet pride. Neighbors waved, kids played ball near my fence, and nobody whispered anymore. On weekends, I fixed bikes for free and grilled hot dogs for kids. Lacey said, "You're turning into the guy everyone trusts again." I smiled, thinking that maybe trust isn't given, it's rebuilt nail by nail. I even got invited to join the Chamber of Commerce downtown Dayton. The irony made me laugh. I'd gone from outcast to member in silence. When I attended, people shook my hand without hesitation or memory. The world forgets your fall when you rise quietly. One evening, Marcus ran in waving a letter from a regional magazine. They wanted to feature local craftsmen reviving integrity through work in next month's issue. I read it twice, not sure whether to laugh or cry about it. They mentioned my name alongside others who'd once lost everything too. I stood there long after he left, holding the paper like confession. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud without guilt. Dylan's voice didn't echo anymore. Only mine did, quiet but certain. I'd built a life strong enough to hold silence like steel. Still, deep inside, I wondered if peace was truly complete without closure. I knew it was only a matter of time before fate brought him back. That fall, Dayton hosted a community business fair downtown in the Civic Center. I was asked to speak briefly about craftsmanship and second chances. Standing on that stage, looking at all those faces, I froze slightly. I saw Dad in the back row, thinner, smaller, but unmistakably him. Next to him stood Dylan, older, weary, holding his son by the hand. My pulse hammered, but my mouth kept moving, calm and steady somehow. I talked about rebuilding not just homes, but character, with quiet resolve. When the applause came, it wasn't loud. It was respectful, clean, full. I stepped off the stage feeling both light and heavy all at once. The silence that had saved me was finally leading me home again. After that event, everything began shifting faster than I could process it. The magazine article came out the next month, and my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls poured in from neighboring towns. Requests for renovations, restorations, and new builds. Each one mentioned my story, how I'd risen from nothing through silence. I never liked that phrasing, but I understood its power in print. Clients didn't just hire me for work. They hired me for faith restored. I felt something new growing under my ribs, something steady and earned. I expanded the team, rented a second truck, and bought newer equipment. When I looked at the fresh logo on the truck door, it felt sacred. Whitfield Restorations no longer sounded like survival. It sounded like legacy. The next turning point came through an unexpected call one Thursday morning. A man named Peter Clarkson from a large contracting firm in Cincinnati wanted to meet. He'd read the magazine article and said they needed reliable partners for government bids. "You've got the work ethic and reputation we want," he said, confidently. I listened carefully, my heart thudding like a quiet drum inside my chest. He offered me a subcontractor role for a civic library renovation. Big money, real stakes. It felt like the universe had circled back to test my strength again. I spent nights drawing plans, organizing teams, double-checking every detail twice. When I signed that contract, my hands trembled from disbelief and pride. That signature was my quiet revenge carved in black ink. The project was demanding, deadlines tight, inspections brutal, and expectations high. But every time I walked through that site, I felt something sacred return. Men who once ignored me now nodded with quiet respect when I passed. My crew worked harder than I'd ever seen, driven by my calm example. I never raised my voice. I led through the silence I'd mastered. Inspectors complimented our consistency, calling it the cleanest work they'd seen in years. That praise hit deeper than applause. It felt like moral redemption. When the building opened, local news covered the ribbon-cutting ceremony. They mentioned my company by name and called me a Dayton comeback story. I smiled politely, but inside I whispered, no, just the truth returning home. A week later, my father showed up at the workshop for the first time. I froze, mid-measurement, the tape shaking slightly between my hands. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, carrying a weight words couldn't name. Heard you built that library, he said, voice gravelly, uncertain. I nodded, not trusting my throat to make sound just yet. He looked around, scanning the walls lined with photos and blueprints. You did all this without us? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Yes, sir, I said, steady and respectful but distant. He nodded once, eyes glassy, then said, Your mother would have been proud. I didn't reply. Silence said more than forgiveness ever could. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the stars like they owed me nothing. For years, I'd dreamed of this moment, of him admitting my worth. But when it came, I didn't feel victory, just a soft, heavy peace. Maybe revenge wasn't a strike, it was the slow rebuilding of dignity. I poured myself a cup of coffee and thought about Dylan next. If Dad had found me, then Dylan couldn't be far behind. Part of me wanted to see him, the boy who'd broken our bond. Another part still carried the wound too deep to reopen. I'd built a life stronger than his betrayal. Did I need confrontation now? I didn't have the answer, but I knew fate rarely waited long. The next week it found me, through a call I almost didn't answer. Mr. Whitfield, this is Kelly Andrews from Statewide Developments, she said politely. Your company's been shortlisted for a restoration bid in Dayton. You'll be meeting with co-owner Dylan Whitfield. My grip tightened on the phone till it almost slipped from my hand. I swallowed hard, staring at the floor while my pulse pounded thick. Understood, I said, my voice calm, controlled, practiced over years of silence. The irony hit so hard it almost made me laugh out loud. I was about to compete against the brother who'd once buried me in lies. The tables had turned, but I wasn't sure I wanted revenge anymore. The meeting happened in a sleek downtown office lined with glass and arrogance. Dylan walked in late, suit crisp, but eyes carrying quiet cracks underneath. He froze when he saw me, like seeing a ghost wearing calm and success. Aaron, he said softly, his confidence flickering just slightly in the corners. Mr. Whitfield, I replied evenly, refusing the warmth of brotherhood just yet. The room went quiet enough to hear the hum of air vents. The woman beside him cleared her throat, reading project details aloud quickly. Every sentence about integrity and reliability sounded like a sermon directed his way. I signed the final form, thanked them, and left before silence turned into confession. Weeks later, my company won the bid. Clean reputation always beats a dirty one. The announcement came through email at dawn, and I sat staring at it quietly. The victory didn't feel loud. It felt like the world finally exhaling. My crew celebrated, but I stayed in the office long after they'd gone. I looked at the contract and thought about the years it took to arrive here. Every insult, every cold night, every silence had led to this paper. My revenge had never been loud. It was made of steel and patience. I closed my eyes, whispering, "Thank you, God, for letting truth take its time." Outside, the world moved slow, respectful, as if it finally knew my name again. That weekend, Dylan sent a message through Dad, asking to meet privately. I didn't answer right away. I wanted silence to decide first. For 2 days I worked without distraction, sanding beams until my hands ached. On Sunday I agreed, not out of anger, but out of finality. We met at the same riverside park where I once sat broken. He looked different, older, thinner, pride worn out by consequence. For a while neither of us spoke, just watched the gray river move. Finally, he said, "You don't know how many nights I regret that lie." I stared ahead, not ready to forgive, but ready to listen at last. Silence, my oldest companion, stood between us again, this time on my side. The park was almost empty that evening, the air soft with autumn wind. The river moved slow beside us, like time hesitating to intervene. Dylan kept rubbing his hands together, nervous in a way I'd never seen. He used to walk like he owned the world. Now he looked lost in it. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said finally, voice cracking. I watched a leaf spin across the water, not ready to grant him attention yet. "You planted the evidence," I said calmly, not accusing, just remembering out loud. He nodded, shame pulling his shoulders inward until he looked smaller than guilt. "I was jealous, man," he whispered. "Dad trusted you with everything. I just wanted a chance." My chest felt heavy, but not hateful, just tired of carrying ghosts. He told me how it fell apart after that night. Slow but certain. Customers started leaving, then suppliers, then even his closest friends. No one trusts a man who wins through lies, he said, eyes wet. I stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that humbles both sides equally. I saw you at the fair, and I couldn't even stand up straight. His voice broke, and the wind filled the silence between every word. I remembered how loud his laughter had been when I was dragged away. That memory still cut deep, but it no longer bled the way it used to. I thought destroying you would make me more, he said, but it made me nothing. For the first time, I saw not my enemy, but my brother trapped inside regret. We sat in silence long enough for the sky to bruise purple and gold. I thought about Mom, about how she'd hated conflict more than sickness itself. Dylan wiped his eyes and said softly, "She never stopped praying for you." My breath caught. Hearing her name still hit like an unfinished sentence. "You should have told me," I said, voice low, steady as the river below. He nodded, biting his lip, unable to meet my eyes again. "I thought you'd hate her too for believing me," he said, breaking down. I didn't hate her. I'd only hated myself for not defending the truth. I looked at the water, wondering if forgiveness was another kind of silence. "I missed her funeral," I whispered, and he covered his face like a child. When I stood up, Dylan stood too, trembling like a man facing judgment. "What do you want from me?" I asked, not cruel, just honest. He took a deep breath and said, "A chance to tell you I'm sorry." The words came out cracked, like something he'd practiced for years in shadows. "I lost everything I built, and you rebuilt everything I broke," he added softly. I didn't move closer, but something inside me finally stopped resisting. Silence wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about choosing peace over pride. I didn't forgive him out loud, but I let the air soften between us. For the first time in years, we both stood on even ground again. "Take care of Dad," I said quietly, and started walking toward my truck. He followed a few steps, stopping near the old bridge railing. "Aaron," he said, and I paused without turning around. "How did you survive it? The shame, the noise, the looks?" I thought about it, really thought, before answering in the same calm tone. "I stopped explaining myself," I said. "I let silence tell my story." He nodded slowly, tears shining under the streetlight like confession beads. "You're stronger than I'll ever be," he whispered as I walked away. I didn't feel stronger. I just felt finished with anger's weight. That night, for the first time in years, my sleep came easy and deep. The silence that once caged me had finally set me free. A month later, we crossed paths again, this time at Dad's small house. He'd invited both of us to dinner, something I hadn't imagined possible. When I arrived, Dylan was already there, setting the table quietly. Dad greeted me at the door, voice shaking with emotion and age. "Let's not waste tonight on what's gone," he said, holding my hand tight. The living room smelled like Mom's cooking, even though she wasn't there. For a moment, I almost expected her to walk in humming softly again. We ate mostly in silence, the good kind that comes after storms pass. When Dad raised his glass, he said, "Family's not perfect, but it's still family." I nodded, feeling both grateful and wounded in equal measure. After dinner, Dylan pulled me aside to the porch under the porch light. "Dad's been sick," he said quietly, "and I didn't know how to tell you." My heart clenched, not from surprise, but from the echo of déjà vu. "You're telling me now," I said, not angry, just acknowledging the change. "He wants to make things right before it's too late," Dylan continued softly. I looked through the screen door, watching Dad laugh at the empty kitchen. Time felt cruel then, how it waited until everything was fragile to teach lessons. "You've changed," Dylan said, and I smiled faintly. "So have you, I think." We stood there until night swallowed the house completely. For once, our silence didn't divide us. It connected us like old wood, mended by care. In the weeks that followed, I visited Dad often, fixing things around the house. The creak of old boards, the hum of tools, the sound of home returning. Dylan would join sometimes, handing me nails, never talking much anymore. The quiet between us had turned into something sacred, not awkward. I saw him trying, really trying, to be better, humbler, smaller before truth. Dad watched us both, tears glinting whenever he thought we weren't looking. One afternoon, he said softly, "Maybe silence was what this family needed all along." I didn't answer, but I understood exactly what he meant. Some wounds heal only when the noise dies down enough to listen. That fall, our house didn't echo with pain anymore, just steady, working peace. By Christmas, we were sitting together again, not perfect, but present. Dylan brought his son, who ran to me with bright eyes and open arms. "Uncle Aaron," he said, like I'd always been part of his small world. I lifted him up, heart swelling with something cleaner than pride, maybe grace. Dad smiled from his chair, the kind of smile that seals old cracks shut. "You boys finally figured out what matters," he said, half laughing. We exchanged a glance that needed no explanation, no apology. The weight we carried for years finally drifted out with the winter air. For once, our silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like home rebuilt. Maybe forgiveness doesn't need words after all, just proof of who we've become. Dad passed quietly in his sleep that following spring, the house still smelling of cedar polish and rain. We buried him under the oak behind the church, the same one where he taught us to swing hammers as kids. Dylan stood beside me, eyes down, face pale and aged by remorse. The preacher spoke about legacy, but all I could hear was silence, the kind that fills space after a truth has finished speaking. I kept my hand on the coffin lid longer than anyone else, feeling the grain under my fingers. The wood was smooth, the finish clean, just like Dad would have wanted. "He was proud of you both," the preacher said softly, but I wasn't sure that was true. Pride had died with him, replaced by quiet understanding instead. Dylan's shoulders shook beside me, and for the first time I didn't look away. I just let him cry, because grief was a language older than guilt. After the service, people came and went with casseroles and condolences. Dylan barely spoke, just followed me around the house like a shadow that needed purpose. When the last car left the driveway, he finally said, "You know, he forgave me before he went." I nodded, sweeping the porch out of habit, the broom whispering against the old boards. "He told me he wished he'd listened to you that night," Dylan added, voice barely holding together. I kept sweeping, letting dust and memory mix in the cool wind. "He said you had more of him in you than I ever did." I stopped then, leaning on the handle, eyes stinging but dry. "That's not what matters now," I said, surprising myself with calm honesty. Dylan looked up, confusion flickering across his face like passing headlights. "Then what does?" he asked, voice small as a child's. "What we do next," I said quietly. "That's the only thing that counts." He started spending more time around my workshop after that, just helping. At first I thought guilt brought him, but over time it felt like rebuilding. He'd hand me tools, take small jobs, and stay late cleaning up without complaint. Sometimes I caught him watching me the way a man studies redemption. I didn't push. Silence still worked better than questions for us both. One afternoon, he asked if he could invest in the business, voice trembling slightly. "Not for control," he said, "just to feel useful again." I stared at the floorboards, hearing Dad's echo somewhere behind that request. "You don't owe me," I said. "I owe you everything," he answered, eyes glistening. For a long time, neither of us spoke again. We just worked side by side. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't always arrive with fanfare. It just starts showing up quietly each morning. Months passed, and the business grew stronger with our combined effort. People didn't whisper "the brothers" with pity anymore. They said it with respect. Dylan was good with Aldine numbers, just like Mom had been, steady and sharp. I trusted him again, slowly, the way you test a board before stepping. One afternoon, a new client walked in, a journalist doing a "Where Are They Now" piece. She recognized my name from the library project and smiled politely. "Would you two be willing to share your story?" she asked kindly. I looked at Dylan, who shifted uncomfortably, but didn't look away. "If it helps someone understand silence doesn't mean weakness," I said. The article came out a month later, titled "Brothers Who Built Their Way Back." It felt strange, seeing our story told without bitterness, just truth in plain sight. After it was published, people reached out, old friends, even former clients. Some apologized, some admitted they'd believed the worst all those years ago. I didn't hold grudges. Time had already handled that part for me. One evening, Lacey came by with a copy folded neatly in her bag. "I told you your silence was sacred," she said, smiling proudly. I thanked her, feeling the weight of everything she'd witnessed since the diner days. "You think he deserves this piece?" she asked softly, glancing toward Dylan across the lot. I followed her gaze, watching him load supplies with quiet diligence. "He's still learning how to live with his ghosts," I said truthfully. She nodded, patting my shoulder once before heading back to her car. Her words lingered long after she left, blending with the hum of saws and forgiveness. One night, Dylan showed up late, carrying 2 beers and the old family photo album. He set it on the workbench, the dust swirling up like forgotten breath. "You remember this?" he asked, pointing at a picture from Dad's first roofing job. I smiled faintly, our faces younger, bright, untouched by betrayal yet. "He always said we were his right and left hands," Dylan murmured, voice cracking. I nodded, staring at that photo longer than I'd admit out loud. "You broke that bond once," I said. "Not as accusation, just fact." "I know," he said, "but I'd give my life to rebuild it now." The silence after that was thick, but not hostile, just real, human, raw. I put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Then start by forgiving yourself." He looked at me like the words hurt, but healed at the same time. "That's the part I don't know how to do," he whispered weakly. "You'll learn," I said. "You just have to stop trying to erase it first." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening in the low shop light. "I still see your face from that night," he confessed, shaking his head. "I see mine too," I replied quietly, "but I'm not angry anymore." He took a long breath, then exhaled like a man finally letting go. "You're a better man than me," he said, voice breaking into pieces. "No," I said. "I just chose a different kind of silence." For the first time, he smiled, not proud, not relieved, but simply human again. When the shop closed that night, I walked outside and sat on the hood of my truck. The air smelled like sawdust and spring rain, the scent of fresh starts. Dylan joined me, neither of us saying anything for a long while. The stars stretched wide above us, clear, forgiving, endless in their stillness. "You ever think Mom sees us now?" he asked finally, eyes distant. "Yeah," I said softly, "and I think she's tired of watching us hurt." He laughed weakly, wiping at his eyes before the tears could fall. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw my brother again. Not the liar, not the rival, just the boy I used to protect. In that moment, I realized guilt had finally finished teaching its lesson. A few weeks later, he brought his son by the shop again, smiling easier now. The boy ran to me, carrying a drawing of a hammer and a house. "Dad says you're the best builder in the world," he said proudly. Dylan laughed, shaking his head like he couldn't believe his luck anymore. I looked at them both and felt something in me settle completely. "Nah," I said gently. "We just build things that don't fall anymore." His eyes met mine, and this time silence wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. Sometimes revenge fades, but dignity stays to finish the story. We'd both found our peace, even if it came years too late. For the first time in my life, forgiveness didn't feel like surrender, it felt like freedom. It's strange how quiet life becomes when the noise finally stops chasing you. The workshop hums in the background most days, steady and peaceful. Marcus runs the floor now, and Dylan handles the books with quiet grace. I walk slower these days, measuring moments more than wood. Sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason other than peace itself. The world that once laughed behind my back now greets me with open doors. I don't crave approval anymore. It found me the day I stopped explaining. There's a deep calm in knowing you don't have to prove truth anymore. I spend mornings by the river, coffee in hand, watching light scatter across water. That same river once held my pain. Now it holds my reflection without shame. People ask me how I did it, how I survived being destroyed by my own blood. I tell them the same thing every time, by staying quiet long enough to hear myself again. Silence is the only teacher that doesn't lie. It doesn't comfort you, it confronts you until you find peace inside your scars. Dylan sometimes joins me on those mornings, standing beside me without words. We watch the water move, and I see in him the boy I once lost. He's learning still, how to live without the shadow of guilt behind him. I don't offer advice anymore. Lessons find people when they're ready. Every once in a while he'll say, "Thanks for not giving up on me." And every time I answer with a small nod, because forgiveness doesn't need volume. The business grew beyond anything I imagined that night I lost everything. We work across 3 counties now, building homes, schools, and community spaces. Every project feels like a small redemption for the boy I was back then. I've hired men who've been through prison, addiction, and broken homes. I tell them my story, not to inspire, but to show recovery can be quiet. You don't have to scream to come back, I say. You just have to show up. Sometimes they don't believe me until they see the rhythm in my work. That rhythm, that silent perseverance, has become the heartbeat of this place. Dylan calls it our second life, and maybe he's right. Maybe we were both meant to be broken before we could ever be real. A journalist from Cincinnati called last month asking to write a follow-up piece. She wanted to know if I'd forgiven my brother completely after all these years. I didn't give her an answer right away. Some truths don't fit in articles. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a quiet decision you make every day. Some mornings I feel it fully, like sunlight breaking through gray clouds. Other mornings I still feel that sting, that echo of betrayal, soft but alive. I don't hide it anymore. It's part of my story and not a stain. Dylan read the first article once and said, "You're too kind to me." I told him, kindness isn't weakness. It's survival learned the hard way. He smiled then, the same crooked smile we shared as kids fixing fences with Dad. Sometimes I visit Dad's grave on Sundays, sitting beneath the oak in silence. The wind rustles through leaves like whispers from a world that forgives quietly. I tell him about the business, about the team, about Dylan's boy growing tall. I tell him I finally understand why he valued work over words. You can't argue with what's built to last. It stands on its own. I leave my gloves there sometimes, a reminder that I kept the promise. You taught me to build, I whisper, and silence taught me to rebuild. I don't know if he hears me, but I like to think he does. There's comfort in imagining he's proud, even if pride's too small a word. Love, I've learned, isn't loud. It's patient enough to wait for redemption. One evening, after the shop closed, I found Dylan sitting by the door. He was staring at the floor, holding the same envelope I'd once seen years ago. "What's that?" I asked, locking up behind me. "The last payment from the house I lost," he said, his voice calm now. "I want you to take it. I built it with what I learned from you." I looked at him, at the quiet humility in his face, and shook my head. "Keep it," I said. "You earned your own peace now." He smiled faintly, eyes soft, and for the first time I believed it too. Sometimes life gives you back everything you lost, just in quieter forms. We sat there till nightfall, two brothers who'd finally learned how to stay whole. Lacey came by a week later, bringing pie and a question I wasn't ready for. "Do you ever wish you'd spoken up that night?" she asked softly. I thought about it for a long moment before answering honestly. "No," I said. "If I'd shouted, I would have lost more than my name. Silence saved me. It stripped me down until only truth was left." She smiled, half sad, half proud, and said, "Then maybe that was your purpose." I laughed lightly, shaking my head. Maybe just my lesson. As she left, I looked around the shop filled with warmth and work. Everything I'd built came from pain I didn't let define me. That's what silence does. It doesn't erase the hurt. It turns it into strength. Now when people say my name, it doesn't sting anymore. It stands tall. Aaron Whitfield isn't the man framed at a party. He's the man who rebuilt in silence. Dylan's my partner now, my brother again. No titles, no debt between us. We still don't talk much about the past. It's better as a lesson than a wound. His son works summers with us, and I see in him what we once were. Every nail he drives echoes with something holy, redemption passing quietly forward. Sometimes I wonder what Mom would think if she saw us now. Maybe she'd just smile and say, "Boys, you finally learned to listen," and maybe she'd be right. Silence didn't destroy us. It remade us into men worth remembering. If this story touched you, please like and share. And tell me, should I forgive my brother completely or let the silence speak for me forever?